Good morning. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the lecture number 18 of this course on Introduction to Research and Methodology. In this lecture, we are going to discuss the various concepts which are important in research design. We have heard about the variables many times in our lectures. What is variable? Variable is a concept that changes, that takes on different qualitative, quantitative values. A concept that does not take changing values is constant, is no variable. So, the variable are those concepts which keep on changing and taking different values like weight, height, income are all examples of variables. Consumption, experience, qualification, the children leaving the schools, if we are studying that, or say the FDI or remittances or the instances of divorce or the vagabond children or those children who have no support from either of the family or from the relatives, number of schools, banks, number of banks, all there are millions of the concepts which take different values. Trade, export and import, these all take varying numbers, changing numbers. This is why they are called variables. They change their values. They take on different values. Then we call them the variables. Now, what is the dependent variable and independent variable. A dependent variable is one which is explained, which is caused, whereas an independent variable is which causes, which has an impact, which is the reason of the phenomena. So suppose we want to study the impact of fertilizer on the productivity of wheat or any other commodity, then here fertilizer is independent variable, whereas the productivity is dependent variable. Why? Because fertilizer is causing productivity to change, to improve. So, fertilizer is independent variable and the productivity is dependent variable. Or suppose we say the domestic policy determines the foreign policy. Here the domestic policy is independent variable, whereas the foreign policy is dependent variable. Why? Because independent variable, which is the domestic policy, determines, makes a change, causes difference to the dependent variable, that is the foreign policy. Or if we say that poverty breeds crime, then again here poverty is an independent variable, whereas crime is dependent variable, because poverty is making crime to happen through the statement that we have undertaken. I am not saying that it is always so. If we want to study the relation between poverty and crime, then poverty would be taken as independent variable, whereas the crime would become the dependent variable. Between income and consumption, income is independent variable, whereas consumption is dependent variable. It is the income which is causing consumption. It is the income which is dictating consumption. It is the income. With a change in income, there is change in the consumption. So here the income is independent variable, whereas consumption is dependent variable. I wish everything is clear to us. Then, and of course, we have the ways to quantify the qualitative data also. It would be done through the presence or absence of the concerning attribute. So, what happens when we quantify the qualitative data? See, in qualitative data, we would enter either presence or absence of the data. So, suppose we are studying honesty, then it would be there either it would be there or not there. So, if it is there in the table we write 1, and if it is not there, then in the table we write 0, that is absence. So, the qualitative data is quantified according to the presence or absence of that attribute. A student, a research scholar is studious or not, sincere or not. If we have to quantify this, then it would be either present or absence. So, all the concepts which are qualitative, they would be quantified on the basis of their presence or absence, and then the study is made. So, I wish that dependent and independent variables are clear in our minds. Then comes the discrete and continuous variables. What is that? All those phenomena which can take on quantitatively different values even in decimal points are called continuous variables. Income, consumption, they can take values in decimal points also, or the say liquidity, or say the various other weight or length or height. These all can take their values in the decimal points. So, these are continuous variables. Whereas, there are those variables which cannot take their values in decimals. They can be only expressed in integer values. These are non-continuous variables, or in statistical terms, discrete variables. The best example is the number of siblings. It has to be full integer. Either there will be 2 siblings or 1, there will not be 1.5 siblings. Somebody asks, how many brothers and sisters you have? So, he or she can reply, we are 2 brothers and sisters. But if there would be no person who would say that we are 1.5, 1.8, 1.3, that is absurd. So, that is the discrete variable. That is the non-continuous or rather discrete variable. Then we have the concept of extraneous variables. What are these extraneous variables? These are independent variables which are unrelated to the study's purpose but may affect the dependent variable, and these are termed extraneous variables. What does it mean? That we are studying a problem, we are studying a relation, but in the model we have not specified some more of the independent variables which also do influence the phenomenon. Such kind of variables are called extraneous variables. Extraneous variables. Why? Because they had not been taken into the model, but still they are affecting it. So, the solution is to include those in the model for our study. So, for example, in the relation between income and consumption, the consumption is of course dependent on income, but it may also be dependent on the size of the family. It may also be depend upon whether the household has its own house or is staying in a rented house. So, these variables also impact the consumption along with the income, no doubt. Income is the main independent variable causing the consumption, but there are also some more variables like the size of the family, whether the household owns its own house or has taken a rented house. There may be other factors like this which should be affecting the consumption. This is the extraneous variable. The best solution is to include those in the model also and study their impact also. Then suppose a researcher wants to test the hypothesis that a relationship exists between children gains in social study achievement and their self concepts. So, the research is designed such that the effect upon the dependent variable is entirely attributed to the independent variable and not to some extraneous variable or variables. And as I explained, that the best solution is to find and include those extraneous variables into the model. Then there is concept of control which is rather very much compulsory in the science research or the life science or medical research, but in social science also. Increasingly now there is use of control. The important characteristic of a good research design is to minimize the influence or effect of extraneous variables. The technical term control is used when we design the study maximizing the effects of extraneous independent variables. In experimental research, the term control is used to refer to restraining experimental conditions. So, we are studying the impact of fertilizer on the productivity. There are other factors also which do affect, like the quality of seed, quality of land, quality of irrigation. So, if we want to study the impact of fertilizer on the productivity, then what we can do? We control the other factors, like we have control over the quality of land, quality of seed and the quality of. And by controlling those factors, we in fact study the impact that is purely done by the fertilizer. And also, suppose we are studying the impact of, say, a special coaching, a special kind of coaching on the performance of students for in their competitive exam, then we make two groups. One is given normal coaching, another is given additional special coaching along with the normal coaching. So, we have controlled the normal coaching and then we are studying the impact of the special coaching. So, in social science also, in development studies also, there is frequent use of this control. We have earlier on many occasions, we have discussed the control. So, today I am not going to explain it in very detail. Confounded relationship, what is that? If the dependent variable is not free from the influence of extraneous variables, the relationship between the dependent and independent variable is said to be confounded by extraneous variables. Like if suppose we work on the impact of fertilizer on the productivity, but we do not control the other factors. So, the other factors like the quality of land, seed and quality of irrigation, they also are influencing, and since we did not control those factors, so a relation which comes out of that study would be called a confounded relationship. So, it must be clear that wherever the extraneous variables have not been taken care of, then the study and the relation would result in confounded relationship. Then we have the research hypothesis. This term is a prediction or a relationship is to be tested by scientific methods. It is termed as a research hypothesis. And remember that the research hypothesis must have one independent and at least one dependent and at least one independent variable. Otherwise, it is not a hypothesis. And we should also differentiate between research questions and the hypothesis. There is lot of difference between research questions and the hypothesis. A research question may qualify to be a hypothesis or not. It is not necessary, but a research question which has both the dependent and independent variable, then maybe it qualifies to be hypothesis, but not all the research questions. We have to differentiate between these. There would be separate lectures on the hypothesis in future. So, we will discuss in detail over there. But by this time, we must be very clear in our minds what do we mean by the research hypothesis. Then we have the experimental and non-experimental hypothesis testing research. When the purpose of research is to test a research hypothesis, it is termed as hypothesis testing research. It can be of the experimental design or of the non-experimental design. The experimental research, the hypothesis testing research is also called experimental research. So, we observe that there are various types of research, and in all of them hypothesis testing is not necessary. So, if it is an hypothesis testing research, then it is a experimental research, whereas where it is no hypothesis testing, and in many of the researches even hypothesis is outcome of the research. So, those studies are called non-experimental hypothesis testing research. Then the next is the experimental and control groups. In the experimental hypothesis testing research, when a group is exposed to usual conditions, whereas when the group is exposed to some treatment, novel or special condition, it is termed as experimental group. So, when we are doing research on the impact of fertilizer on the productivity, then all those groups in which the factor of quality of seed, quality of land, and the quality of the irrigation has been, these factors are under control, and there is no treatment of fertilizer in those particular research fields, we can say that it is non-control group where fertilizer is being infused, treated, whereas where the fertilizer is not being given, it is control group. Further, next example, when we are studying the impact of special coaching, then what we did? We made two groups. In one of the group, there was normal coaching. There was no special coaching. That is called the control group. Whereas in another group, along with the normal coaching, they were given a special coaching. So, this is called the experimental group, where the treatment is being given. So, the group which remains normal under control, it is called control group, whereas group in which along with the normal, there is a special treatment to study the impact of this independent variable. It is called the control. It is called the experimental group. So I am again, it is clear to, I hope I have been able to clear to all of you about the experimental and control groups. Next is the treatment. I use the word treatment. So what is that? Treatment. The different conditions under which experimental are and control groups are put, the different conditions under which the experimental and control groups are put are usually referred to as treatments. In the fertilizer is a treatment in the previous example. In the example of coaching, a special coaching is a treatment. If we are introducing a new medicine for diabetes and we are making two groups of patient, one is the control group with normal medicine and another is the experimental group along with the normal medicine. They have to be given this new medicine. So this new medicine would be termed as the treatment. So the term treatment must be clear because it makes the difference. The impact has to be studied. So these are termed as treatments. We have introduced this into the phenomena to study its impact. We introduced a special coaching to the experimental group to study the impact of special coaching. A special coaching would be termed in technical term, would be called in technical terms as treatment. We introduced the new medicine to the experimental group of the patients. So this new medicine has to be termed, is termed technically as the treatment. Next is the experiment. The process of examination of the truth of a statistical hypothesis relating to such problem is known as an experiment. For example, we conduct experiment to examine the usefulness of certain new developed drug. So this is a process of experiment, is a process or procedure to examine the effectiveness of the treatment which we discussed earlier. So that process is called experiment. Many experiments are done in the lab. Many experiments are done in the field, especially agriculture research. Many, and not only that, many are done in the society also. Suppose one has to study the poverty and impact of certain policy on the poverty. So, that policy which we are going to study is the treatment, and we would make control group where the normal system works on, whereas in the experimental group of population we would be studying the impact of that policy, that is the treatment. So, this whole process of studying the impact of treatment on the phenomena is called the experiment. Then the experimental units. What are those? The predetermined plots or the blocks where different treatments are used are known as experimental units. Such experimental units have to be devised correctly. In the field of agriculture, when we are doing research on the impact of to study the impact of fertilizer, then we had identified and worked on certain plots and blocks. These are experimental units. So, similarly in the case of social science, we studied the impact of certain policy on the poverty. We studied the impact of the special coaching on the success of students at the competitive examination. These are called the experimental units because these are first selected to be treated, to be given the treatment. Like if we are working on say 4 blocks, or if we are working on 2 groups of people to study poverty, or if we are working on 2 groups of students for a special coaching, we identify beforehand the block, the group of people, the group of students where the different kinds of treatments are to be given. These are called the experimental units. So, in brief, these were the certain important concepts which are very useful in studying or developing the research design. And I am hopeful that I have been able to clearly mention and state these very well, and I have been able to make it clear to you. Thank you very much.